tonight, but unfortunately, she was not able to travel. So we are glad that at least we have a virtual alternative so that we can listen to her talk tonight. Stefania Bournot is a part Chief BK grant holder. It's a grant program for excellent young scholars by the Austrian Academy of Sciences, of which she is also a fellow. Her scholarly work covers trans-regional approaches to cultural expressions from the global South, with a special focus on South Atlantic entangled histories, decolonial epistemologies, and critical ecologies. She has authored a book, Giros fotográficos, reescrituras del espacio en la narrativa latinoamericana del siglo XXI, in English, topographical terms, rewritings of space in Latin American narrative literature in the 21st century. So it's about recent literature, and this book has been published with Potsdam University Press in 2022. Beyond this, she has published numerous articles and book chapters on Latin American and West African art and literatures. And tonight, she will... Oh.
It is okay. It's because we are using this microphone, but...
Okay.
Yeah, no problem.
Tonight she will speak about rethinking development through South lens, eco-critical approaches from the extractive sowing. And Stefania, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Miriam, for your kind presentation. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you, Luis, also for coordinating this. It's a pleasure to be at least virtually with you tonight. And it's also a great honor to be part of this lecture series at SILAS. I believe it's an important space for Latin American studies in Germany. Truly sorry for not being able to make it all the way to Eichstätt. But yes, I'm happy that we can at least share the screens for a while. I thought discussing the concept of development was quite timely and relevant today, not only because we're witnessing a clear erosion of political and economic frameworks that have shaped Latin America in recent decades, but also because in the face of the profound ecological crisis manifesting globally, we are seeing a reconfiguration of global development models. This moment brings us back to fundamental ideas proposed by dependency theorists in the 60s and 70s, compelling us to rethink the interconnections between neocolonial structures of exploitation and extractivism that have contributed to the situation we find ourselves in today. The topic of development intersects also more or less directly with the two main areas of research that I have been engaged in over recent years. On the one hand, and building on my first book that you just mentioned, which examines spatial production in literature and the arts, and much of my more recent work, which focused on the geological turn in Latin America, along with emerging theoretical and artistic expressions that explore new languages and relationships with land and non-human entities. Here I want to call your attention. Next week on Monday, we have the second part of this special cluster I'm co-editing with Azucena Castro on geosemantics, meanings of the earth. The first one was on the global south, and the second one will be exclusively on Latin America. We have many scholars and artists contributing to this online class. It's open access. You can search for it online from next week on. On the other hand, as you also just mentioned, there's another field of research I have been working on that seems to be distant from this one. at first sight. It's a project that I've been working on about networks of cultural diplomacy and third world solidarity between Africa and Latin America during the Cold War. During this time, we had transcontinental alliances emerging that reflect the height of third worldism and the rise of dependency theory, sparking a vigorous debate around development models in the wake of African and Asian independence movements, as well as the authoritarian regimes that were taking control in many Latin American countries. Indeed, in 1964, just months after Castelo Branco's coup d'etat in Brazil, Leopold Sédar Senghor, who was a renowned poet of negritude and the first president of independent Senegal from 1960, visited Brazil for the first time. And upon his arrival in Rio de Janeiro, he delivered a speech in which he emphasized that it was not only cultural and historical ties rooted in the shared colonial history marked by the slave trade that united both nations across the Atlantic, Brazil and Senegal, but also the common challenges that they would have to face in the realm of development. I'm quoting from his speech. This is not a published speech. I found it in the archives I've been working on in Senegal as well as in Brazil. And this is my own translation from it. The third reason for our affinities is that we both belong to the third world, that is, to the underdeveloped world. The current division of the world is not so much between ideologies, between East and West. Remind you, we are in the with backdrop of the Cold War here, but between North and South, between the former colonizers and the formerly colonized. For the Senegalese, the gravest danger is cultural. It is that in this universal civilization, which rises despite everything before our eyes, the values of the third world are cast aside and the great powers build behind our backs a civilization of theft. This concept of universal civilization, civilisation de l'universel, was key of Senghor's thought, and there's a lot of literature written on this concept he developed. Senghor's speech offers, I think, a powerful critique that resonates deeply with the ongoing struggles in both Africa and Latin America to assert independent paths of development that resist external colonial powers. By invoking the concept of civilisation du vol, civilization of theft, Senghor was warning of a global order in which the dominant powers not only control economic and political structures, but also, and most importantly, marginalize and appropriate cultural values. He frames development not as merely as economic growth, but as a cultural and civilizational challenge, one that requires asserting alternative values against the homogenizing forces of Western-dominated universal civilization. This critique aligned with some of the views of dependency theorists, which emerged at the same time in the 60s and 70s. Emphasizing that underdevelopment in the global south was not a natural condition, but a result of historical exploitation and unequal relation with the global north. For both Senghor and some thinkers of dependency theory, the north-south divide is not simply about resources, but about cultural and epistemic imbalance that cast aside non-Western ways of knowing and being. Building from these ideas, which criticize the economic structures that perpetuated Latin America's and Africa's underdevelopment, we can draw parallels to a more recent concept, the more recent concept of the extractive zone, as defined by Macarena Gómez Barris in this wonderful book I can only recommend. While dependency theory exposes the ways in which global capitalist systems maintain unequal relationships between the North and the South, perpetuating a cycle of resource extraction and dependency that prevented autonomous development, the concept of the extractive zone expands the analysis of dependency to encompass the environmental impacts of colonial and neo-colonial exploitation. It highlights how the Global South's landscapes, ecosystems, and bodies are transformed into sacrifice zones, extractable, wasted, in the pursuit of resource and profits for the Global North. As Gómez Barris explains, before resources can be extracted, both territories and people must first be rendered extractable through a process of symbolic and representational violence. The extractive view, rooted in colonialism, reduces land and people to commodities, turning them into resources to be exploited while devaluing the cultural, human, and non-human relationships within those spaces. The extractive view conceives of spaces as terra nullis, empty territories, deserts, and views peoples as disposable. Building on my recent research into these historical third world connections and eco-critical approaches, I wanted to take this talk as an opportunity actually to explore comparative approaches between African and Latin American cultural productions and their role in shaping or contesting this extractive view that Macarena Gómez Barris describes. In order to do so, I will center my analysis on the representation of rivers across two historical periods, colonial, post-colonial, and two continents, Africa and Latin America. This is actually a brand new topic I'm exploring today with you. It is the first time that I present this paper, so it might have some loose ends, but I thought that it could be tuned with the topic we have at hand on development, and I would be very interested in hearing your comments, suggestions, or questions afterwards. So why rivers? I think rivers are highly charged cultural landscapes. They have been sites of life, of mobility, and spiritual meaning for centuries. Yet they are also spaces where the tensions of extraction and exploitation become sharply visible. In literature and the arts, rivers are often depicted as spaces where competing ideas about nature, civilization, and national imaginaries converge. They embody the flow of wealth and the displacement of communities and the alteration of ecologies, offering a compelling lens through which to analyze the symbolic and material impacts of development. In the context of Latin American cultural productions, have been instrumental in constructing a visual and rhetorical apparatus that supported modernization and state-led development projects. Scholars like Victoria Saramago, I have the book cover here next to Macarena Gómez Barris, demonstrates that canonical Latin American literature has historically represented key landscapes like the Amazon, the Brazilian sertão, las novelas de la selva, las novelas de la tierra, in ways that align with these state agendas, helping to shape public perception of these environments as homogeneous spaces open to modernization. In this way, cultural representations not only reflect specific environments in the sense of a mimetic reproduction of them, but actively shape the public understanding of those landscapes, promoting narratives of progress that obscure the ecological and social impacts of extractive politics. The emerging field of environmental humanities in Latin America has increasingly focused on rereading this canonical literature against the violent foundational rhetoric of the 19th century nation-building projects. Scholars like Barbas Roden, Carlos Fonseca, Victoria Saramago, Jens Andermann, and there's a long list, have revisited significant spatial imaginaries such as the novel of the jungle, the drought novel, Novelas de la Tierra, revealing how these landscapes were shaped within the framework of these modernization projects led by this idea of development. The question that I would like to reflect on with you today is, What is the link between literature, culture, and extractivist narratives surrounding rivers? How have literature, storytelling, and other cultural expressions contributed or challenged the colonial extractive view of waterways? The comparative South-South perspective invites us to reflect how alternative visions of development can be formulated when we examine African Latin American experiences in tandem. Some of the central questions guiding that analysis are: how can the South-South cultural connection help us develop new frameworks for understanding and resisting extractivism? How do these representations contribute to alternative ecopolitical visions that challenge the dominant growth-centric model of the global North? To explore these questions, the presentation will first focus on 19th century works by Domingo Faustino Sarmiento's very well-known essay, Facundo, Civilization or Barbary, and Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness, which depict rivers as wild, mysterious territories that need to be tamed and controlled by the pursuit of progress. In a second round, the second part will revolve around contemporary voices that challenge this view. I will approach the works of Congolese writer Fiston Wansa Mujila and the Colombian artist Carolina Caicedo. Both of them reimagine the power of rivers, providing critical perspectives on development that honor local ecologies and advocate for multi-species model of conviviality. Through literature, art, and activism, these contemporary voices emphasize that development cannot come at the cost of environmental degradation and cultural erasure. Ultimately, by linking African and Latin American experience, I hope to reveal how these regions share entangled histories and ecologies that offer insights into possible pathways beyond extractivist development models. So the first part, I wanted to start with one of the most paradigmatic works of 19th century Latin American literary canon, which also established a regional model for representing the Latin American landscape. Facundo, Civilización y Barbarie en las Pampas Argentinas, authored by Domingo Faustino Sarmiento and published in 1845, just 35 years after the independence from Spain. It is therefore a foundational moment for the Argentine state. This work has been read from many perspectives, primarily through the lens of the opposition between different forms of governance. On the one side, we have barbarism embodied in the figure of the caudillos, like Facundo, this historical figure, who represents the barbarism of indigenous and criollos people and the untamed wild landscapes of the Pampas. On the other side, we have the civilized forms of government found in cities with stronger European influence like Buenos Aires. However, behind this dichotomous vision of space and its inhabitants, who, according to the author, are shaped by the landscape they inhabit, lies a model of development and society that should also be read through an eco-critical lens. That's one of my arguments. In the articulation of this dual vision of the Argentine territory, the desert plays an extremely important role. In the first chapter of the book, Sarmiento offers the following diagnosis of the country. The ailment that afflicts the Argentine Republic is its vastness. The desert surrounds it on all sides and creeps into its very core. To the south and the north, the savages lie in wait, ready to pounce like swarms of hyenas under the moonlight upon the livestock grazing in the fields and the defenseless populations. So these savages are the indigenous people who inhabited that territory. And referring to the rivers, he says, another force is indeed to steer these arteries. The arteries are the rivers, in which the life-giving fluids of a nation now stagnate. All these rivers, which ought to carry civilization, power, and wealth to the most remote depths of the continent. In these two quotes, we can see an example of how the desert functions as a mechanism for the symbolic erasure of indigenous cultures. Sarmiento presents it as a no man's land or a nearly uninhabited territory where indigenous peoples are regarded as illegitimate and savage inhabitants, posing a threat to the security of the civilized cities. Additionally, Sarmiento's notion of civilization is linked to the extractive practices where nature is conceived as something separate from culture, a product, a commodity to be exploited and integrated into the circuits of capital to contribute to the nation's progress. His description of rivers as arteries for industrialization reinforces this extractivist view where natural resources are seen primarily in terms of their economic potential. In his first book, Mapas de Poder, Maps of Power, Jens Anderman analyzes how the formation of the Argentine state with a homogeneous and cohesive national identity was only possible through the symbolic erasure of the biotopic diversity of the landscape and of its inhabitants, under notions of deserted territory or terra nullius, like I just mentioned. This symbolic desertification, as depicted in Facundo, provided the intellectual foundation for attracting European migrants to populate these supposedly empty lands with the goal of civilizing them. Echoing the motto "to govern is to populate," as articulated by Alberdi in Las Bases, which became the guiding principle of the Argentine Constitution. Furthermore, the ideological framework also paved the way for the expropriation of indigenous lands later on. It is important to mention that between 1868 and 74, so a little bit more than 20 years after the publication of this essay, Sarmiento became president of the country of Argentina. And during this time, this literary projection of the Facundo began to materialize through campaigns promoting massive European migration and the expansion of the agricultural frontiers over indigenous territories. The vision of reviving the desert culminated in 1878 with the so-called conquest of the desert, Conquista del Desierto, a military campaign led by Julio Argentino Roca, where troops were sent to the southern province of Buenos Aires to finally end, this is a quotation, the savage attacks. In other words, it was about to subdue the indigenous populations that was seen as a threat to the nation's progress. The military operation by the Argentine state resulted in the killing of more than 14,000 indigenous people and the displacement of another 6,000 at least, who were relocated as field laborers or enslaved workers in other regions of the country, such as the plantation in the north, sugar mills, cotton fields, and rural states. Some others were employed as domestic workers in the cities. The result of this operation was a new redistribution of land and the imposition of an agricultural and livestock exploitation model that persists to our days, primarily centered around extensive monocultures of cereals and livestock farming. This extractivist economic model has already shown its symptoms and severe ecological impacts. The indiscriminate use of agrochemicals and the high levels of contamination affecting various forms of life are central themes in the literary works of Samantha Schwebling's Distancia de Rescate, Juan Cárdenas, El Diablo de las Provincias, Cristian Romero, Después de la Ira, Lina Meruane, Fruta Podrida. There's a long list of narrative works depicting these monocultures in South America. Javier Uriarte, in his book Desert Makers, postulates that the wars waged against the deserts, like this conquest of the desert that was impulsed by the Argentinian state, were in fact ways to generate empty spaces or true voids that became the condition for new foundations of productive models of cities. Like, for example, Brasilia was only possible because they first created a desert. In Facundo, Domingo Faustino Sarmiento envisions Argentina's rivers as pathways of civilization and progress, vital for the transforming of the barbaric rural interior into a modern European-inspired nation. While Argentina was struggling to define its national identity, Sarmiento was seeing rivers like the Paraná or El Río de la Plata not just as a geographical features, but as conduits that could help bring order, commerce, and European values to regions he deemed uncivilized. They are natural channels that can connect urban centers to the rural expanses, facilitating the flow of commodities, infrastructure, and European influence into regions he sees as backwards and chaotic. For Sarmiento, rivers were conduits of progress, carrying promise of civilization deep into the Argentine heartland and transforming it into a productive modern nation. Published almost 50 years later, Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness takes us to one of Africa's most important rivers and landscape of brutal colonial exploitation of the Congo Free State. Written during the height of European colonialism in Africa, Conrad's novel tells the story of Marlowe, a sailor sent by a European trading company to retrieve Kurtz, an ivory trader who has descended into moral corruption and madness. Joseph Conrad, who was a Polish-born British author, drew on his own experiences as a steamboat captain on the Congo River to craft this story. So it's based on his own biographical facts. In The Heart of Darkness, the Congo River serves as both the physical and metaphorical boundary separating, again, the civilized world of Europe from that of the colonizers, considered the barbaric unknown of Africa. Unlike Sarmiento's vision of rivers as channels for development and progress, Conrad's Congo River represents a descent into moral ambiguity, revealing the darkness and violence within the colonial project itself. For Marlowe, the main character, the journey upriver is not one of enlightenment, but of disorientation and moral confrontation as the river challenges his European assumptions about civilization and savagery. Both authors see rivers as a construct and as a way to reinforce a divide between civilization and barbarism, but the way they do so reflect distinct colonial approaches. In Facundo, Sarmiento envisions rivers as I mentioned, as pathways to progress. And his characterization of the Argentine interior as a desert erases the complex cultures and communities that inhabit the land, framing it as empty and uncivilized. In The Heart of Darkness, Conrad's portrayal of the Congo River similarly reflects a colonial gaze framing Africa as a vast, hostile wilderness. However, he depicts this vision by presenting the river as a force that resists European understanding and control. In one passage, Marlowe describes how, I'm reading here the first quotation, The broadening waters flow through a mob of wooded islands. You lost your way on that river as you would in a desert, and butted all day long against shoal, trying to find the channel, till you thought yourself bewitched and cut off forever from everything you had known once, somewhere far away in another existence, perhaps. Here we see how Conrad likens the river to a desert, again, an empty and hostile space reflecting this colonial view of Africa, again, as a terra nullius, as a blank, uncharted land open to exploitation. But it also captures the frustration and disorientation felt by the European colonizers. Unlike Sarmiento's visions of rivers as clear pathways for civilization, Conrad's rivers become an elusive, almost malevolent force that traps and isolates the colonizers. The entanglement between symbolic representation and resource exploitation is central to understanding the political ecologies of the global South, both in Africa and in Latin America. Portraying rivers and landscapes as empty, hostile, or chaotic spaces has enabled the material dispossession of land and communities. The idealization and simplification of nature in literary and cultural narratives create the justification for its extraction, which becomes more than an economic endeavor. It is a cultural and ideological project. As Macarena Gomez Barris notes, the extractive system not only consumes the land, but also extends its reach into the symbolic sphere, generating a discourse that minimize or erase alternative forms of ecological and community cohesion. This symbolic erasure has had profound implications for the perception and policymaking towards landscapes across Latin America and Africa, where these developmentalist state projects have historically reshaped territories with them and their social dynamics. We'll go to the second part, Le Fleuve dans le ventre, or the river in the belly, by Fiston Mwanza-Mujila. After examining the colonial and extractive perspectives on rivers in Facundo and Heart of Darkness, I wanted to shift our focus to other present days productions that explore how contemporary Congolese poet and novelist Fiston Mwanza-Mujila reimagines river, transforming it from a channel of extraction and civilization into a profoundly embodied, personal, and cultural force. In his poetry, especially the ones gathered in this collection, The River in the Belly, Le Fleuve dans le ventre, original, it's written in French. Mwanza challenges the colonial dualities of nature versus culture and civilization versus barbarism, instead presenting the river as an intrinsic part of his identity and the lifeblood of his people. His work not only critiques the extractive legacy of colonialism, but also questions the very framework that reduces rivers to resources to be controlled and exploited. I'm going to read this poem for you. It's not easy to read, and every time he presents, he does a very interesting performance. I'm not going to be capable of, but we're going to try. Solitude 47. So this collection of poems is organized by solitudes. All the poems are a solitude number. Not blood, but the Congo River sloshes in my veins. If you deny it, if you have your doubts, if you don't believe me, take up a sharp object, a steak knife or bayonet will do, and cut me open, slice me up, skin me from belly to belly, from head to foot. You'll see what you see, the left leg of the river, where my guts should be. Didn't they tell you, after all, my mouth stinks of Lake Mukamba, once infected with schistosomiasis? Didn't they tell you that the Niriagongo beats in place of my heart? Didn't they tell you my hair is equatorial forest? Didn't they tell you my tears are lava from Nyamulagira and my laughter is the gusts that blow on Wembeditu and Kanyamba Kasese? In contrast to the disembodied utilitarian view of the Congo River that we read before in Conrad's rendition, Wansa's poetry offers a visceral, intimate relationship with the river that blurs the line between human and natural, individual and landscape. His lines, not blood, but the Congo River sloshes in my veins, reveal a river that is not merely outside the self, but deeply internalized, woven into his very flesh. Here, the Congo River is not a remote or alien place to be dominated, but an extension of the being and the community. This vision appends the colonial portrayal of rivers as a dark, mysterious, or other to be explored or exploited. Instead, Wansa's river pulses within him, inseparable from his identity and culture. Wansa's work redefines the river from an extractive resource to an embodiment of cultural heritage and ancestral connection. The colonial framework presented rivers as commodities existing solidly to be harnessed by wealth and progress. Wansa's, however, reclaims the river as a space of personal and collective history, imbued with memories and myths. When he writes, didn't they tell you, after all, my mouth stings like Lake Mukamba, once infected with schistosomiasis, and so on, he embeds natural elements and historical scars directly into his body. By doing so, he collapses the distinction between the human and the non-human, emphasizing that he carries within him the rivers, the lakes, the landscapes that colonial narratives once attempted to render inert and extractable. Wansa's words suggest that to harm the river is also to harm himself, illustrating an interconnectedness that disrupts the colonial nature-culture division. And that I believe it goes very much according to the concept of cuerpo territorio that many feminist theorists, especially indigenous feminists, have been developing in Latin America. The embodiment of the river also serves as a powerful critique of the historical and ongoing exploitation of the Congo's natural resources. Wansa's poetry resists the reduction. There are many poems that are really wonderful to read. I can only encourage you to do so, that focus more on this, the extractive mines, the history of extraction in Congo, and so on. There's also a novel that also depicts these dynamics of mining history in Congo. Wansa's poetry resists this reduction of the river to a mere waterway for extraction, as seen in Conrad's depiction, and instead imbues it with agency, with emotion. His laughter and tears flow from the river itself, symbolizing joy, pain, and resilience rooted in the land and its water. This vision of human emotion with the natural landscape challenges the extractive logic that views rivers and ecosystems as objects, highlighting instead a relationship of reciprocity and mutual respect. There are at the beginning, I thought I could also include some Nigerian novels on the Niger Delta, but it would have been too much. I just wanted to point out to this a photo reportage by George Osodi on the oil contamination in the Niger Delta. Some of Mwansa's poems also kind of echoes this representation of intoxicated landscapes and oil pollution and so on. So I will jump into Caicedo's Serpentine River exhibition. In her video installation, Spaniards name her Magdalena, but natives call her Yuma. Colombian artist Carolina Caicedo presents her personal and political connection to the Magdalena River, also known as the Yuma, Colombia's largest river. This work includes footage of dams along the Yuma and other rivers, juxtaposed with her widespread narration about the river's significance. The video is available online on Vimeo if you are curious about it. She describes the river as the fluid connection between ecosystem, between the past and the coming times, between people and geographies, situating it as a bridge across time and space. This perspective resonates with indigenous and local communities who view the river as a vital force in their lives, yet who face displacement and violence at the hands of corporations and governments. Caicedo's approach, which he describes as spiritual fieldwork for creating these works, involves immersing herself in the places she studies and building relationships with both the human and non-human entities. In doing so, she aligns herself with the communities fighting for their rights to water and land, recognizing the river not only as a life-sustaining force, but also as a site of resistance against corporate and state violence. In Serpent River, Caicedo creates a large-scale sculpture that resembles the sinuous movement of a river constructed from salvage fishing nets. The work invokes the visual and symbolic form of a serpent, a creature revered in many indigenous traditions as a symbol of water and life. Through this sculpture, Caicedo highlights the interconnectedness of water, life, and culture, representing the river as a living, breathing force rather than an inert resource. The serpent form also symbolizes resistance, qualities that Caicedo sees in the river's ability to flow and persist despite human interference. Serpent River is both a tribute to the river's enduring presence and call to resist the capitalist forces that seek to bind it within artificial boundaries like the dams that cut this flow and also interrupt the dynamics around the rivers and the communities that live there and have to be displaced in order to construct these dams. One of her biggest and most famous projects is called Dam, like playing wordplay with dam construction and dam. In another project, Cosmotarraya, Caicedo constructs sculptures from fishing nets to capture the stories of people who have been displaced or dispossessed by the privatization of rivers. These nets, handcrafted by fishing communities, are artifacts of a way of life under threat. Their open flowing shapes are a stark contrast to the rigid structures of dams and convey the adaptability, resourcefulness, and resistance of the communities who depend on rivers for survival. Cosmotarraya embodies Caicedo's call to reimagine our relationship to water, emphasizing the idea that rivers, like people, cannot be confined without consequence. The flexibility of the nets stands as a reminder of the right of rivers and communities to exist freely. Both Serpent Rivers and Cosmotarraya reflect Caicedo's deep commitment to advocating for a relational understanding of water that honors its role as a communal and spiritual force. By transforming discarded fishing nets into symbols of resilience, Caicedo not only critiques the extractive practices that threaten rivers, but also reaffirms the dignity and rights of the communities who live with and through these waterways. Her works invite us to reconsider our place within these relationships, pushing us towards a model of ecological justice that respects both the autonomy of rivers and the interdependence of human and non-human life. So, as a closing remarks, the entanglement between the symbolic representation and material exploitation has played a powerful role in shaping these global South's landscapes. By portraying nature as inert, colonial narratives render indigenous and local communities invisible, erasing their knowledge systems and relationships with these lands. The symbolic erasure allowed for the unrestricted exploitation of resources, and landscapes were treated as depopulated and dehistoricized spaces. As Macarena Gómez Barris and other scholars argue, this exploitative discourse have been further reinforced by post-colonial state narratives that supported extractivist policies. This symbolic construction of nature as untouched Eden or a desert effectively silences alternative ecological perspectives, reinforcing the exploitative cycles that impact both in the communities and the environment. In recent years, however, we can see how powerful resistance and subversion of this colonial view have emerged from contemporary perspectives in literature, art, and scholarship. Artists and writers from the global South, such as Finston Mwanza-Mujila, Carolina Caicedo, reclaimed rivers and landscapes as sites of cultural identity, memory, and resilience, embodying them within their works and living entities with agency and rights. These portrayals challenge the colonial binary of nature versus culture, instead emphasizing interconnectedness and mutual dependence. By presenting the river not as a passive channel, but as an integral part of the self, these works invite us to see environmental justice as inseparable from social justice. The relational perspective subverts the extractive logic of colonialism, reframing nature as an active participant in cultural and ecological systems that deserves consideration. The blurring of the nature and culture divide in these contemporary works underscores the importance of integrating ecology, politics, and culture into a cohesive framework for critique. Recognizing that environmental and cultural histories are deeply intertwined allow for a more holistic approach to understanding the crisis facing that the global South is facing today. A comparative South-South perspective on rivers and landscape provide an alternative model of development that values community reciprocity and sustainability over exploitation. Ultimately, I believe that this approach underscores the necessity of understanding art as deeply intertwined with the eco-material conditions of its production, and therefore it also serves as a space of political negotiation. From this space, symbolic as well as performative acts of environmental justice or injustice can be articulated and contested. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Estefania, for this very inspiring talk. And I'm sure there are some questions. You gave us a lot of material for discussion, which I now open. So who wants to start? Maybe I have several questions. So, so maybe I start with the first one. You have started with the citation by Seda Senghor, where he replaces the east-west binary by another binary, the north-south binary. So I wonder if we really change things if we talk about the global north and the global south instead of the east and the west. So I wonder, what is your opinion? Does it really change something in our thinking to replace one binary by another one? Or don't we just continue the binaries created by colonialism?
Thank you for the question. Well, I think we have to read this quotation within the backdrop of the Cold War. He was referring to the sorry, it's so late, I'm tired. The confrontation between the East Bloc and the West Bloc in that sense. There were competing powers, hegemonic powers at that time, with the Soviet Union on the one side and the Western world on the other. And he was pointing out that the challenges that we as third world nations have to face are not related to this confrontation. Actually, this is imposed on us. Our challenges have more to do with the gaining control over our own destinies, gaining national sovereignty. Although they had recently obtained independence, only years before he delivered this speech. This speech was 64, and Senegal gained independence in 1960. Or I think he was very criticized, but also quite aware that colonialism was not over with that retrieve of the French colonial forces from the territories. It continued to exist in different forms. So in a way, I think, although 50 years or more passed from this, we're still facing the same challenges in the global south. We can see in Latin America as well as in Africa how neocolonial structures continue to shape the politics of extraction in most countries.
Thank you. So there's a question by Patricia in the chat. Please, Patricia.
Thank you so much. And thank you for this super interesting lecture. Thank you so much for sharing. I have a couple of things that I wanted to ask. My brain is like doing many things at the same time. It's really stimulating your work. You mentioned that the body territory relationship that Latin American feminists work on are part of the things that you are taking in your in the analysis. So I wanted to ask you if you have analyzed this aspect in the authors that are part of the sample you have studied in your research. Because many investigations show that women as subordinate subjects have used metaphor and art to express what they cannot express openly because of their subordinate condition in patriarchal power relations. Have you analyzed this relationship between nature, women, subordinate subjects, and culture, male hegemonic subjects in this? Or have you put your findings in dialogue with the contributions of decolonial anti-extractivist, feminist, and feminism and their expression in art? Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for your interest. This is definitely, I think, a key question, the gender approach to this kind of poetics, I would say. As I mentioned at the beginning, it is the first time that I present on this topic. And I recently discovered the poems by Fiston Mwansamujila and immediately thought like this poetics really represent very well this notion of body territory, even though he's not a woman. But I had been working previously on this topic of the body territory and women artists and writers. I have some publications where I depth a little bit more on that topic, and I think it's definitely one of the trademarks, I would say, of contemporary women artistic production in Latin America. This parallel between the territory and the embodiment of it. And you can see that much clearly in the work of indigenous women artists and activists, that most times it goes hand in hand. Their activism is very intertwined with their artistic practice. Some articles or essays that appeared in this online cluster reflect directly on this. There's an article by Leila Gomez on Mapuche women in southern Argentina. And I am preparing a new article with my colleague Azucena Castro on women artists working on the body territory in Latin America. But I think it's definitely a very important, a core topic surrounding this landscape representation and embodiment.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
There's one question in the room, and afterwards we have some questions from Bogota.
Okay. Yes, I am not familiar with this issue, but I have a question related to Carolina Caicedo. Is there a major dialogue among local people from the north and the south about these themes? Is is there a public discussion about her art?
Oh, you mean people from the north, south of Colombia or the world?
Case of her, I understand she is Colombian, but
Yes.
she lives in the United States and was born, I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, she became quite famous in the last years. She has had exhibitions at the MoMA, Guggenheim, so all the main artistic venues in the United States. And she has also created works in the United States that refer to ecological and problematics that are happening within the United States territory, like she was working in a dam construction. I don't remember exactly in which state, southern of the United States. But yeah, she's quite well-known figure and a public figure. Her
But
work.
is there exchange among, for example, Colombian groups and North American groups, or are they separated?
Yeah, the groups she works with, the communities.
Yes, the
I
community.
believe so. I believe so because some projects integrate experiences and participants from different countries. She was even recently here in Germany doing a workshop at the in Kassel, I think related to the Documenta, and she integrated people from different communities. So yes, I believe there is an exchange.
Thank you.
So
Do you write in the questions, maybe the group in
they
Malta?
haven't written
Yeah.
them yet, so we
I
will
have some questions, some one comment, yes.
Okay. Yeah, so we will give room for maybe some questions from Bogota, and then we will have another round here.
Okay.
So in the turn, please.
Yes.
Okay, so we're.
We're listening.
Yeah, go ahead.
Here it goes.
Okay, I will read the question. How can you connect this historical development process and extractivism with modern expressions of art? Do you consider that those ones express correctly the consequences of development and extractivism?
Sorry, I missed the first part. Is it written somewhere or?
It's written text from the meeting.
Here, sorry. Historical development person. Does this one express correctly consequences? It's a very broad question, but I would say there is a shift, a critical shift in the way contemporary artists are conceiving of their creative practices, very much in collaboration with communities, and also giving voice, or at least with the intent of giving voice to non-human subjects, like the river, or like the earth, or like the forest. While I would say many writers and artists from the 19th century, maybe even part of the 20th century, acted almost as state agents, in a way contributing to impose the development agendas of the governments, or in the case of colonial administrations in Africa, for instance. So in that case, I would say art was functioning as part of the extractivist and colonial machine, while now artists are taking a more critical stance towards it, and differentiating their practices from more a bottom-down perspective. I don't know if I answered well, but
Yes, yes, of course. Don't worry, of course, yes. Yes, so do we have time for a couple more questions? From Bogota, or do you want to ask your questions in Iceland?
We take one question from Eichstätt and then another one from Bogota.
Thank you.
I think there was a question by Daniel.
Yes, thank you very much for. I speak there, so hi. Yeah. Thank you very much for your presentation. It's closely related. Yeah. Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Thank you so much for your presentation. It's closely related with the last question because I think that several ideas of progress or development come from a technical field of knowledge, often rather bureaucratic. I would like you to elaborate a bit more on how we can trace through literature or artistic languages the incorporation of these technical debates or specialized concepts into the broader public discussion. Much better if you have an example in mind. And a second question, if you can respond, if you have identified influences of the Latin American extractivist experience in resistance agendas or African sensibilities. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, yeah, these are very interesting questions. In the book by Javier Uriarte, The Desert Makers, he works actually on works that are literary works that have been written mainly by technicians, engineers, surveyors of the territory, like Osertons. He's now working on also fluvial aesthetics in Latin America from the perspective of also architects and technicians. I think they are very intricate. There's also the work of Paulo Tavares, who is an architect, and he's been working within what's called now forensic architectures. I don't know if you've heard of it. And he has recently published a book on the rights of nature or the architecture of the forest, where they kind of merge this analysis of the symbolic sphere and the technical sphere. How do they actually correlate or contribute, influence each other? About artistic productions in Latin America and in Africa, well, what I've seen is many similarities that are being developed in parallel. There are some conversations, not that much actually. There are some spaces that promote this kind of South-South dialogue and collaboration, but it's not the most usual thing. And nevertheless, the discourses and even the aesthetics are so relatable, and that's what I want to encourage also, this kind of approaches, South-South approaches that bring together these perspectives, because I think they have much in common to discuss. And that was also one of the goals that we had with Azucena when we co-edited the first part of the geosemantics cluster that was centered on the Global South, and we incorporated essays revolving on the Middle East, North Africa, Asia, And we could see how many concepts and debates were taking place at different points, but had similar concerns. So I think it's a very interesting pathway to explore. Also, all the problematics revolving land grabbing and water resources, they are all common throughout the Global South geographies. So yeah, I think it is a way to go now, south-south.
Thank you.
So now it's Bogota's turn again.
Thank you. It's already in the chat.
Yeah, oh, sorry. What forms of development are possible for countries that were previously exploited by external powers and in which the existing development systems were subsequently dismantled? Should these countries continue with the development trajectory initiated by the colonizers, or are there alternative pathways for their economic and social advancement, taking into account the idea of resistance?
Mhm.
And
I was 2 weeks ago, I was in a conference in Italy about environmental challenges in the Global South. And it was very interesting because it was very interdisciplinary. We had people from the social sciences, we had engineers, people from Algeria, from Iraq, Latin America. And it was interesting to see how the engineers and some of the social scientists were also, so what's the solution? What's the solution? And people from the humanities who are more like describing, analyzing the stories. I don't think there is an answer for that. I think each community, each place needs to find their own solution. And I think the solutions can only be locally based. I don't think we can provide like an overall answer to development alternatives.
Question, comment?
See, question by Louis Demier from Eichstätt.
Stefania, thank you. Thank you. Thank you again for sharing with us and for giving us the privilege to hear you for the first time, your reflections on narratives, representations of river. Thank you for sharing with us this interesting perspective. I have a general comment that I'm to say the relevance of this kind of arguments that you are from the side of literature studies making for denouncing and for making the point that it is necessary for thinking in alternative ways of relations with nature to make this poetry of the rivers, this special geographical poetry, as you mentioned. So this is very important because this is precisely showing how or that contrasts to this pillar of the foundation of nature of nations in Latin America or in many places where the elites were people that they don't value the biodiversity, they don't value the rivers, they don't value certain elements that for the indigenous people were fundamental in their point of view, in their cosmovision. So thank you for making this relevant intervention in the world, so to say. This is very important. I have some questions about the so to say the state of the art of this environmental turn in literature.
Mhm.
As you presented, I'm sure I'm conscious that it is not possible to show the diversity, but this is more presented as the commonalities of this field of reflection, and the commonalities are about denouncing how the extractivism is a big challenge for the future of the for the future societies. But I would like to know if in this research you have detected some diversity. For example, you say some people are denouncing from the post-developmentalist perspective. But I'd like to know if there is others perspectives in this way to approaching the subject. And another question is, have you make some connections in your work uh, with the peace construction? I mean, in Colombia or on places where the war is constant, to gain a sense of interdependence with nature, to value nature otherwise is very important. And I would like to know from your point of view, which is the role of this work for peace construction, for peace building?
Thank you very much for all the comments and the questions. The field of environmental humanities is huge, and it has many branches, sort of, and it's only been expanding. Like every year, we see more and more publications up from different perspectives. Not all of them take extractivism as at the core, but more and more there are approaches from the new materialism perspectives, redistribution of agencies, non-human subjectivities. There is also a lot or more and more collaboration between the natural sciences and the humanities. That's what it's been trying to be encouraged to do. More and more interdisciplinary work on that regard. And I don't think there are fundamental conflicting views like there are scholars sustaining that extractivism is actually great. I don't think that at least has any critical support within Latin American studies, environmental studies, eco-critical studies. But there are just different ways to approach what is actually I would say it's more like a tool and a framing and different ways to access it. The last question about peace, I think they're of course interconnected, certainly, because we're talking about indigenous resistance to keep their territories and communities that are also fighting against different kinds of corporate or state violence. So I think in a way to spread or contribute to better understanding that conceives of different logics of conviviality and relations with the environment. I struggle to say our relation with the environment because from many perspectives, there is no such a thing as us and the environment. We're not in the environment, but we are part of it. It's all part of the same network, kind of. So yeah, I think it's necessary to foster peace at all different levels, not only Colombia, but certainly Colombia is a key aspect of peace building, considering these different cosmologies that sustain also different connections and life forms.
Thank you. Is there another question from Bogota?
Yes, there is.
Yeah.
In the chat again.
Thank you.
Bogota is very active.
Proposals for sustainable development from the northern perspective, which are generally thought of in global terms. Could a new negotiation bridge be created between the territoriality of the South and this new form of development from the North? Or should we only on the formulation of sustainable developments from local perspective? Could it be said that previous developments provided identity to rivers like the Magdalena by creating productive human relationships entirely dependent on the river's fluidity?
I think any solution for coming or being imposed externally upon a community or a territory will never be the right one. So in that sense, if there is a northern solution being delivered, and I see this a lot when I have attended conferences where they talk about the path towards sustainability, sustainable cities, and they talk about electric cars as the ultimate solution for carbon emissions. And I think, yeah, how are you going to construct all these cars? Where are the lithium resources coming from? So what means a solution for them here in Europe might result in another ecological catastrophe in, let's say, in this case, North Argentina, Bolivia, with all the water consumption they need to extract lithium, for instance. So I think we need to contrast this, or there needs to be more dialogue and consider both sides of this supposedly sustainable development. What does sustainability actually means for the North and what it means for the South? What was that? The Magdalena River? I was not aware that the Magdalena River was provided identity. I don't know in what sense do you mean that? Because there are some rivers that have been provided legal identity. Now the question is who can defend their rights, who is allowed to speak for them. And there is a realm where I think art offers a powerful tool. This kind of artistic, community-based artistic interventions and creative processes. But although it all sounds very well, rivers, mountains, the Pachamama was also provided legal entity in Bolivia and Ecuador some years ago, but this didn't prevent the government to continue exploiting in even a more savage way the resources of the Amazon, for instance, in Bolivia as well as in Ecuador. So it sounds good that they are granted legal entity, but what it means in practical terms is still, I think, to be figured out.
The question?
No, I was thinking in my head.
Okay.
Thank you.
It seems as if there was no more question from Eichstätt. Have you got another one from Bogota? We would have time for one last question.
One last question. Okay.
Okay. How can the perceptions and sensible relations, as Rancière understands the word, with the rivers and space can be seen as forms of resistance?
I think it is more about developing or educating ourselves into a renewed sensibility towards these non-human subjects. How do we relate to trees, to animals, to the river? And there again, I think art is a very useful pedagogical tool to open ourselves into a different kind of perception and sensitive relations towards these different subjectivities and subjects. In this cluster that's going to appear next Monday, we had a very interesting contribution by a Peruvian indigenous artist from the Shipibo Conibo community. And she said something beautiful, like everything that surrounds us takes part of a form of language that we need to learn how to listen. So it is about opening new channels of communication, I think. And this is very much what contemporary artists, especially indigenous artists, are proposing, I think, as a path of exploration.
So thank you very much again, Stefania, for your talk and for the wonderful discussion. Thanks to everyone who joined us this evening or this morning, afternoon in Bogota. And yeah, see you.
Thank you so much for having me, for listening and engaging. It was a real pleasure for me.
Thank you, Stefania, and thank you, Miriam.
Muchas gracias. It was our pleasure.
Thank you, Stefania.
Hasta la próxima.
Gracias a todos.
Bye.
Chao.
Está buena, Pepe.